So a lot of people don't know this, but my mom and her entire side of the family was actually born and raised in the Philippines. So yes, I am half Filipino and I have very, very strong ties to the Philippines as a country and Filipino culture. That said, I grew up here in the US, as did most of the generation that I come from on that side of my family. And that is not by coincidence. At some point along the way, her side of the family decided that they would be much better off here in the US than the Philippines. And honestly, although I haven't visited the Philippines yet, do plan to visit at some point, but although I have not personally been there, I can't fault them for that logic, because the idea, especially coming from a third world country, is that if you come to the US, you will open up a plethora of opportunities that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. So again, I cannot fault them for that logic, and truthfully, it's worked out pretty well for them. I think just about everyone on that side of the family is doing very well. They're making good money, they have their own house, etc. Doing very well. That said, I think a lot has changed since they made that move. And although I'm not saying that the American dream is completely dead, I think it is very quickly dying, and this is for a few different reasons. The first of which being the cost of living / inflation. So I don't know if you've been to the US, especially recently, but the cost of living out here is just astronomical. It's astronomical and nonsensical. I mean, just to give you an example of just one thing, just one particular item. In the Netherlands, at Albert Heijn, which is probably the most expensive grocery store out there, correct me if I'm wrong if you're Dutch, but that's the most expensive one that I personally went to, you can get soy milk for around 89 cents per liter, give or take. And again, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but from what I remember, it was around 89 cents per liter. Here in the US, I have been very surprised to find that the same soy milk, probably even lower quality soy milk, is around $2.29, $2.49, somewhere in that range, for a little over a liter, maybe a liter and a half. Now look, I'm no mathematician, but that shit doesn't add up to me. It does not add up to me, and it doesn't add up in my bank account either, or rather it does add up in my bank account, because that soy milk has been kicking my ass since I got back. It's expensive, and that's the store brand soy milk. That's not even the organic soy milk, and that's from Walmart. If you want to get the store brand soy milk, you can get it for $2.29 to $2.49. But if you want to get the organic soy milk, which the Dutch soy milk is organic, then you're going to be off the hook for about $4 and some change. So literally twice the price, $4 plus. Absolutely astronomical. And honestly, it's long overdue. I need to make a video explaining the differences in the cost of living in the US and the Netherlands, because just across the board, pretty much every category is much, much cheaper in the Netherlands. And you might be saying, well, Jordan, that's because the income is lower. I'm gonna get to that later on in the video, so just stay tuned, because I'm going to break that fallacy. But the cost of living out here is just insane. And again, this is in large part because of inflation. And the idea is that as inflation increases, wages should increase as well. But for years now, inflation has outpaced the increase in wages. And that is objectively bad. Some people defend this. They say, oh, you just need to get your hustle up. You just need to get more skills so you can make more money. At a certain point, most of the nation is going to be in poverty. And it's only going to be at that point that people realize that, hey, maybe we should have done something about this earlier on. Because, I mean, again, when a carton of soy milk is costing you $4.49, and really just groceries in general are costing you so much more. Rent is costing so much. Cars cost a lot, and you have to get a car because there aren't any alternative transportation options, or if there are, it's because you're in a big city, which has a higher cost of living in general. I mean, I don't really see a way to really have a low cost of living here in the US without putting your health in jeopardy in some way, shape, or form. And I'd love to be wrong about that. I would really genuinely love to be incorrect about that. And some people might say, well, you're just not willing to make the sacrifices. If my health is the sacrifice, if my well-being and longevity are the sacrifices, then you're damn right I'm not willing to make the sacrifice. That doesn't make sense. Nobody should have to make that kind of sacrifice. And just to give you another example of how inflation has really changed things, my dad told me, and when he told me this, I literally almost fainted, because I was like, bro, what? This man told me that when he was my age, so I'm 25, actually I think I was 24 at the time, so he told me that when he was 24, they had my sister, my older sister, so she was still a baby, and of course he had my mom with him. This man bought a condominium, okay, a condo. I don't know why this car is creeping up beside me like this. I guess they're pulling in. I was about to say, hold on, we might need to abort mission. But anyways, this man looked me dead in my eyes over FaceTime and told me that he had a condo that he paid around $13,000 for. $13,000. And prior to that, they'd stayed in an apartment that was, this dog's coming up to me. They stayed in an apartment that was, I think, $150 a month, something like that. And when he told me that, it's like a part of my soul left my body, and it hasn't really come back since. I think that part of my soul is somewhere in another country, and I need to find it. I need to figure out where it went. Because $150 a month for an apartment, I don't care where you're at. I don't care if you're in the slums of Detroit, doesn't matter. And this is with no government assistance, by the way. That was just the cost. That's crazy. That is absolutely insane, but in the best way possible, because that's how it should be. You should be able to afford a place to live. You should be able to afford healthy food. You should be able to afford a good quality of life when you have a good job, or even just a decent job. Because look, this is the richest country on the planet. I mean, I've seen people comment on some of my recent videos saying, oh, well, America is richer than Europe and people here make more money and all of this stuff. And look, statistically, they might be right. Although I'm gonna be honest with you, I think a lot of those people, they're not actually saying that America is better than Europe. I think that they're just trying to, I don't know, get attention or just troll people, whatever it may be. But look, I'm not going to disagree that America is the richest country on the planet. But where is the wealth? Where is it? Because, I mean, when you see people sleeping in tents, and this isn't just few and far in between, this is a very common occurrence, especially in larger cities like LA and New York. Where's the wealth? Where is the wealth? People should not be living like that in the wealthiest country on the planet. Because when I was in the Netherlands, I didn't see that. I did not see a single tent on the sidewalk, ever. My whole time there. Didn't see it. Not even once. I also didn't see apartments for $150, but that's neither here nor there. You're gonna be hard pressed to find that pretty much anywhere in the West at this point in time. But America has been hit by inflation very, very hard throughout the past 30 or so years. And I can imagine that it's just gonna keep getting worse. And it's very discouraging to see that, because, I mean, the American dream is predicated on living a better life, but if you can't afford a better life, you can't live a better life. So there goes your American dream, and that's just one component of why the American dream is dying. The next reason is the quality of life. So this one right here really struck me as odd, because growing up, we were sort of conditioned to believe that the US is the best country on earth. And look, maybe I just haven't traveled extensively enough around the US. I've been to LA, New York, I've been to Chicago, I've been to Dallas, Houston, Austin, haven't been to Miami or Atlanta, but I imagine that they suffer from a lot of the same problems as the cities that I just mentioned. Been to Vegas, been to a lot of different places. And I just don't see it, man. I just do not see where this higher quality of life actually is. Because even in Spain, and when I went to Spain for the first time, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what I was expecting, but whatever I was expecting, it surpassed those expectations by a pretty substantial margin. Because Spain alone provided a much higher quality of life than the US from what I saw. Especially when it came to the infrastructure and just a general atmosphere. People just seemed happier and more at ease in Spain. And when I went to the Netherlands, it was like Spain, but a few steps further. Just a very high quality of life all around. And look, I'm not saying the US has a low quality of life, because let's be real, it's still the richest country on the planet, and your average American, even if they're not living as well as your average European, is still living much better than your average resident of a third world country. Especially people who were born and raised in those third world countries. Hence why my mom has not moved back to the Philippines, and why she has obtained her American citizenship. But again, compared to Europe, people here are just not living as well. I'm sorry. Actually, no, I'm not sorry. I take that apology back, because people here are just not living as well. And this wouldn't be as much of a problem if the cost of living wasn't so much higher than Europe. So you have a higher cost of living and a lower quality of life. That's kind of interesting. American dream. Well, it's time to wake up, because that doesn't really make much sense to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it the wrong way or something. I'd love to be wrong about this, and if I am, tell me why in the comments. But I'm just not seeing it. I'm not really understanding why we are, or how we are, the best country on the planet, quote unquote, but we have a disproportionate cost of living compared to our quality of life. It just doesn't add up to me, nor does it add up in my bank account. Now, look, another component of the American dream, a big part of the reason why people defend the American dream to their graves, is because of upward mobility. So the idea is, okay, you can come from poverty, you can come from an impoverished bloodline, and you can single-handedly change the trajectory of your lineage, economically speaking. And the idea is you do this by going to school, getting good grades, getting into a good university, and from there getting a good job. And from there you have a lot of money, you have disposable income, you can get a nice house, maybe a house like one of these with these extra tall fences. You can get a truck like that and live a pretty good life. Well, here's the problem with that. The cost of college is absolutely just criminal. I mean, it's just criminal. When you talk about a society that prides itself on upward mobility, you would think that that same society would fight a lot harder to make that upward mobility more accessible for people. But that is not the case. College is getting more and more expensive, and it seems like people have a very great aversion to making it less expensive, because they don't want government intervention or whatever. They would rather their 18-year-old children pull out $150,000 in student loans and start their lives out that way, where even if they do get a good job, which pays $4,000 or $5,000 a month, $1,500 or $2,000 of that a month is going to the government for student loans, ironically. And they still have to stay with their parents because they can't afford rent. Because again, rent isn't $150 anymore. But this just doesn't make sense to me. This didn't make sense to me when I was in college. This didn't make sense to me before I went to college, and at the age of 25, it doesn't make sense to me now. It makes no sense that college should be as expensive as it is. Absolutely no logical sense whatsoever. And look, truthfully, I probably wasn't going to go to college anyways, or at least wasn't going to finish college anyways, because I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. You don't need to go to college to be an entrepreneur. And that's another component of the American dream, which I will talk about here in a second. But for most people, for the majority of people in a society, they are going to work 9 to 5s. And the idea is you want to get a good 9 to 5 so that you have a lot of money. And ideally also do something that you enjoy and that contributes to society. But in order to do that, you have to go to college, or you can also go to trade school. That is a viable alternative path, but not everyone is built to be an electrician or a mechanic or a plumber or anything like that. And these are very useful jobs which do pay pretty well here in the US. But not everyone is really cut out for that kind of work, just like not everyone is cut out to talk to a camera for a living. Everyone has their own unique skill sets and talents, and I believe that as a society, we should prioritize and facilitate the cultivation of said individual talents, because when you help people cultivate their talents, the talent pays society back tenfold by contributing to said society. But for whatever reason, America and Americans don't seem to really understand this concept. And furthermore, they also don't seem to understand the importance of a social safety net. Here in the US, I'm not saying that there's no such thing as a social safety net, because there are people out here on welfare, there are people who have food stamps, there are people who maybe receive grants from the government when it comes to attending college, but a lot of that is more for the lowest of the low incomes. That's for people who are exceptionally talented and exceptionally broke, come from very, very poor families, which is why so many people feel compelled to pursue sports as a means of breaking their family out of the chains of poverty, is because they may not have the intelligence to get very, very good grades, no matter how hard they work. Because again, everyone has individual talents and skills and should be cultivated accordingly. But with a greater social safety net, I think that we could take a lot of the pressure off of some of these 15, 16, 17-year-olds to break the generational curse of poverty, and maybe hand a lot of that responsibility over to the government of the richest country on the planet. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just a 25-year-old figuring this life thing out like everyone else. I'm not claiming to know everything. I'm not claiming to have all of the answers, but I have developed the capacity to ask questions. And these are questions that it seems like very few people have the answers to, and very few Americans are even seeking out the answers to. And I think it's time for a change in that regard. I think that we as Americans need to start seeking out these answers, and a great way to do that is by traveling, is by going to other places, going to the Netherlands, going to Switzerland, going to France, going to wherever else, whatever place you feel compelled to visit, and literally stealing their ideas. Because ultimately, if America is thriving, then the likelihood is that with America's influence, those countries thrive to an even greater extent than they currently are. So everybody wins. Now, on the topic of travel, I have a pretty radical proposal if you're an American watching this. I believe that the American dream is dying, but a new one is taking its place. And that new American dream is taking your American dollars, at least for as long as American currency, the US dollar, is still more powerful than a lot of these other countries' currencies, taking the American dollar over to these low cost of living countries like, ironically, the Philippines. going to places like the Philippines, Thailand, Colombia, places like that, and essentially living way below your means, but still enjoying a high quality of life. I believe that that is the new American dream, and that's the American dream that I'm currently working toward right now by talking to this camera. Now, the caveat to this American dream is that you either need to A, have the capacity to make money online, so that could either be entrepreneurship or that could be some sort of remote work, freelance work, whatever it may be. You have to be able to make money online in US dollars or euros, or you have to have a lot of money saved up, or both, because you can't take your 9-to-5 with you to these countries. So again, these countries are cheap to live in because the people who live there don't really make that much money. But thankfully, we have computers. If you're watching this, you have some sort of technological device, which means you have the infrastructure to make money online. You have an internet connection, you have technology, and on top of that, you have airplanes, which can take you overseas to a plethora of different countries, even in Europe, that provide a higher quality of life, especially relative to the amount of money you're making, and a lower cost of living.